The first woman to completely destroy my astrology predictions turned out to be the reason I started believing in fate. My name is Samantha Brooks, and for most of my adult life, I had built a surprisingly successful career helping strangers make sense of their futures. Every October, our small Oregon town hosted a famous autumn festival that attracted visitors from all over the Pacific Northwest. There were craft booths, live music, pumpkin displays, and the annual bake-off competition that everyone seemed to take far more seriously than any reasonable person should. For the third year in a row, I rented a small booth near the center of the festival grounds where I offered astrology readings, personality charts, and light-hearted fortune sessions. Most people came for entertainment. Some secretly hoped I would tell them exactly what they wanted to hear. By noon on the first day, business was booming. Families wandered between booths carrying caramel apples and hot cider. Children laughed as they ran through piles of fallen leaves. Everything felt familiar and predictable. Then she arrived. I noticed her because she stood completely still in front of my booth while everyone else moved around her. She appeared to be around my age, with dark blonde hair pulled into a practical ponytail and calm blue eyes that seemed to observe everything. She wore simple clothes that made her blend into the crowd, yet somehow she immediately stood out. "Would you like a reading?" I asked with my usual friendly smile. "Absolutely," she replied. Her voice carried quiet confidence. She sat across from me while I shuffled my astrology cards and asked for her birth date. Within minutes, I began describing personality traits, habits, and likely preferences. Normally, people reacted with surprise at how accurate I appeared to be. This woman reacted differently. "No," she said. "Not even close." I blinked. "Really?" "Not even a little." I adjusted my approach and tried again. "You prefer planning ahead." She shook her head. "I make decisions at the last possible moment." "You dislike uncertainty." "I actually enjoy it." "You avoid risks." She laughed. "My entire career depends on taking risks." Every prediction failed. Spectacularly. By the end of the session, I felt as though someone had secretly rewritten the rules of the universe. The woman seemed amused rather than critical. "You look disappointed," she said. "I am professionally confused," I admitted. She smiled. "That is fair." Before leaving, she purchased a cup of coffee from a nearby vendor and headed toward the bake-off pavilion. For reasons I could not explain, I watched her go. The encounter should have ended there. Instead, less than an hour later, I saw her again standing near the judges' area of the baking competition. Then I spotted her speaking privately with one of the event organizers. Later, I noticed her taking notes in a small black notebook while carefully observing contestants. Something about the situation felt strange. She certainly was not acting like an ordinary visitor. As the afternoon sun settled over the festival grounds, I found myself wondering who she really was. Then, just before closing my booth for the evening, I glanced across the walkway and saw her looking directly at me. She raised her coffee cup slightly and smiled. At that exact moment, one of the festival volunteers rushed toward me and said, "Samantha, do you know that woman? She has been asking questions about almost everyone here." The volunteer's comment immediately caught my attention. I looked back toward the woman with the coffee cup, but she had already disappeared into the crowd. "What kind of questions?" I asked. The volunteer shrugged. "Normal questions, I guess. About contestants, judges, sponsors, even some vendors." "She is probably harmless." Probably harmless was not the most reassuring phrase I had ever heard. As the festival began winding down for the evening, I found myself looking for her without meaning to. Every time I thought I spotted her, she vanished behind another group of visitors or disappeared into one of the exhibition tents. By the time the sun dipped below the tree line, I still had no idea who she was or why she seemed so interested in the bake-off competition. The next morning, I arrived early to prepare my booth. A cool autumn breeze moved through the festival grounds while vendors arranged displays and volunteers hung fresh decorations. I had just finished setting up my astrology charts when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Good morning, professional predictor." I turned and found the mystery woman standing there with another coffee. "Good morning, professional prediction destroyer," I replied. She laughed. "Fair enough." For the first time, she offered her hand. Olivia Hayes. Samantha Brooks. We shook hands. "So," I said, "are you going to tell me why you spend so much time around the bake-off?" Olivia took a sip of coffee. "I like baking. You carry a notebook and interview people." "I am very serious about baking." I narrowed my eyes. She smiled innocently. The expression somehow made her look both trustworthy and suspicious at the same time. Before I could ask another question, one of the event coordinators hurried over. "Olivia, there you are." The coordinator handed her a folder. Olivia accepted it quickly. The moment lasted only seconds, but I noticed something important. The folder carried an official festival logo and several pages labeled confidential. Olivia immediately tucked everything under her arm. "Interesting," I said after the coordinator left. "What?" "Most tourists do not receive confidential paperwork before breakfast." Olivia almost choked on her coffee. "You noticed that?" "I notice everything." Occupational habit. I thought astrology was about stars. It is mostly about people. For the first time, she looked genuinely impressed. Then she checked her watch. "I should go." "Mysterious meeting?" I asked. "Mysterious muffin emergency," she replied. "Very serious situation." Before I could respond, she disappeared once again toward the competition pavilion. The entire exchange should have satisfied my curiosity. Instead, it made things worse. Throughout the day, I saw Olivia everywhere. She spoke privately with judges. She observed contestants. She took notes constantly. Yet nobody seemed concerned about her presence. It was as though she belonged there, even though nobody had officially introduced her. Late that afternoon, I finally decided to investigate. I walked toward the administration tent hoping to learn who Olivia really was. Before I reached the entrance, I overheard two organizers talking. "Has the undercover evaluator submitted her first report yet?" one asked. "Not yet," the other replied. "But she is already finding things nobody else noticed." I stopped walking. Undercover evaluator. Suddenly, every strange interaction from the past 2 days began fitting together. The only problem was that I still had no idea what exactly Olivia was evaluating. The phrase undercover evaluator stayed in my mind for the rest of the afternoon. Every time I looked toward the bake-off pavilion, I found myself searching for Olivia. Now that I knew she was not simply a curious visitor, all of her strange behavior suddenly seemed more significant. The notebook. The interviews. The confidential folder. The constant observations. Yet instead of making me less interested in her, the discovery somehow made me more curious. The next morning brought another unexpected surprise. I was scheduled to participate in a charity event where several local businesses and festival vendors would rotate through different booths to encourage visitors to explore the entire fairgrounds. The idea sounded simple enough until I checked the schedule. My first assigned partner for the day was Olivia Hayes. "You have got to be kidding me," I muttered. One of the coordinators laughed. "You two seem to get along. We thought it would be fun." That should have been my first clue that somebody behind the scenes was enjoying this situation far too much. Olivia arrived a few minutes later carrying her notebook and a cup of coffee. "Good morning, astrologer." "Good morning, undercover evaluator." She nearly dropped her coffee. "Who told you that?" "I have sources." "Dangerous sources?" "Extremely talkative sources." Olivia shook her head and laughed. "Well, now I know not to underestimate you." Our assignment required us to visit different areas of the festival together throughout the morning. At first, the arrangement felt awkward. We barely knew each other. Yet within an hour, conversation flowed surprisingly easily. Olivia possessed a quick sense of humor that constantly caught me off guard. She challenged almost every assumption I made while somehow remaining completely charming. At one point we passed a booth selling handmade candles. I casually mentioned that astrology suggested she was someone who preferred structure and planning. "Still trying?" she asked. "Always." "Then you should know I booked this trip less than 48 hours before arriving." "That sounds irresponsible." "That sounds adventurous." "That sounds like my worst nightmare." Exactly. By lunchtime, I realized something unsettling. I was having fun. Real fun. The kind that made hours disappear without notice. As we crossed the festival grounds, several people greeted us as though we had arrived together. One elderly vendor even smiled and said, "There are my two favorite festival detectives." Olivia and I exchanged confused looks. "Detectives?" she asked. "Apparently." The vendor winked and walked away before offering any explanation. The day became stranger from there. During a pie judging demonstration, the host randomly selected volunteers from the audience. Somehow Olivia and I were chosen. Later, during a pumpkin carving contest, the coordinator again assigned us to the same team. Then a photography contest required pairs of participants. Once again, we ended up together. By late afternoon, even Olivia seemed suspicious. "How many coincidences are we supposed to tolerate before they stop being coincidences?" she asked. I was literally wondering the same thing. We paused beside the main pavilion while festival visitors moved around us. Olivia looked thoughtful. Then her eyes narrowed slightly. "Wait. What?" "Yesterday I saw your friend Melissa talking with one of the event organizers." My stomach tightened. "And?" "This morning I saw that same organizer speaking with my friend Rachel." A strange feeling settled over me. Melissa was my closest friend. Rachel, according to Olivia, was hers. Neither woman had any reason to know each other. At least, none that we knew about. Then Olivia opened her notebook to jot something down. As she turned the page, I accidentally caught a glimpse of the contents. My name appeared at the top of an entire page, filled with handwritten notes. For a brief second, I wondered whether I had imagined it. My name had definitely appeared at the top of that page. Before I could read anything else, Olivia closed the notebook and slipped it back into her bag. The movement was quick, but not quick enough. She saw the expression on my face immediately. "What?" she asked. "Nothing." That was a terrible answer. I sighed. "I think I just saw my name in your notebook." Olivia froze. Not dramatically. Not suspiciously. Just enough to confirm that I had not imagined it. "You saw that?" she asked. "Unfortunately, yes." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The noise of the festival seemed to fade into the background. Finally, Olivia rubbed her forehead and laughed softly. "This is not going to sound good." That is usually how bad explanations begin. She glanced around before pointing toward a quiet picnic area behind the exhibition hall. "Can I explain?" Curiosity won immediately. A few minutes later, we sat across from each other at an empty wooden table beneath a large maple tree. Autumn leaves drifted through the air while festival visitors passed in the distance. Olivia placed her notebook on the table between us. "Before you panic," she said, "you should know that nothing in here is dangerous. That is not nearly as reassuring as you think it is." She opened the notebook and turned it toward me. To my surprise, the pages contained observations about dozens of people connected to the festival. Contestants. Vendors. Organizers. Judges. Volunteers. My name was only one among many. "I told you I am an evaluator," Olivia explained. "Part of my assignment involves documenting community engagement, visitor experiences, and participant interactions." I looked through several pages. Most entries were completely harmless. Samantha Brooks. Astrology booth. Popular with visitors. Strong community connections. Excellent public engagement. I raised an eyebrow. Excellent public engagement? You are surprisingly good at talking to strangers. I literally charge people to listen to me talk. Olivia smiled. Exactly. The explanation made sense. Mostly. Yet something still felt strange. Then. Why did you look nervous when I mentioned the notebook? Olivia hesitated. Because that page had more than professional notes. That answer immediately captured my attention. What does that mean? She leaned back in her chair and looked embarrassed for the first time since we met. It means I may have written down a few personal observations. Personal observations? Such as the fact that you are funnier than you realize. I blinked. You wrote that down? Maybe. Why? Olivia laughed. I honestly do not know. Before I could respond, a familiar voice interrupted us. There you are. I turned and saw Melissa approaching. My best friend carried 2 cups of hot cider and an expression that instantly made me suspicious. She looked far too pleased with herself. Melissa, I said slowly. Why do you look like someone who knows a secret? What secret? She asked innocently. Nobody in the history of humanity had ever looked less innocent. She handed me a cider before greeting Olivia as though they already knew each other. That alone nearly made me drop the cup. Wait, I said. Have you two met? Melissa and Olivia exchanged a glance that lasted only a fraction of a second. Yet it was long enough. Far too long. My stomach tightened immediately. Because for the first time since this entire strange situation began, I became certain that somebody was hiding something from me. Melissa's expression immediately confirmed my suspicion. She looked exactly like someone trying very hard not to reveal something. Olivia looked equally uncomfortable, which only made the situation more interesting. You have met before, I said. It was not a question. Melissa opened her mouth, closed it, then took a very long sip of cider. Technically speaking, yes. Technically speaking? I repeated. How many ways are there to meet someone? Olivia laughed despite herself. Melissa pointed at her. See? This is why I like her. Melissa. Right. Serious conversation. She set down her cup and sighed dramatically. A few weeks ago, Rachel contacted me. Olivia immediately covered her face with one hand. Rachel? I asked. Your friend Rachel? Olivia nodded slowly. Suddenly, several pieces of the puzzle shifted into place. Why would Rachel contact Melissa? Melissa and Olivia exchanged another glance. This one lasted even longer. That is the part you are probably not going to like, Melissa admitted. Try me. Rachel wanted information about you. I stared at her. What? Olivia quickly raised both hands. In my defense, I did not know she was doing that. That is somehow not helping. Melissa rushed forward before either of us could panic unnecessarily. Nothing creepy. Nothing secret. Rachel simply knew you would be attending the festival and wanted to know whether you were still single, what kind of work you did, and whether you were actually as nice as you seem. I blinked several times. Why would she want to know any of that? Neither woman answered immediately. That silence told me everything. My eyes moved from Melissa to Olivia and then back again. Oh. Melissa nodded. Oh. Olivia looked as though she wanted the ground to open beneath her chair. The realization should have annoyed me. Instead, I found myself trying not to laugh. Let me see if I understand this correctly, I said. Rachel contacted Melissa to ask questions about me before the festival even started. Yes. And Melissa answered those questions. Mostly. And somehow neither of you thought this information might be relevant. Melissa shrugged. It seemed harmless at the time. Olivia groaned. I am going to have a very long conversation with Rachel. Yet even that explanation failed to answer the biggest question. Why was Rachel interested in me in the first place? This time Olivia answered. Because she thought we might get along. I stared at her. Get along? Olivia nodded. She has been saying it for months. The idea felt ridiculous. Rachel had never met me. Melissa had never met Olivia. Yet apparently both women had been discussing us long before we ever crossed paths. The more I thought about it, the stranger it became. Later that afternoon, after Melissa left, Olivia and I continued walking through the festival together. Neither of us quite knew what to say. Finally, I broke the silence. So your friend was trying to set you up? Olivia laughed. Apparently. Without your permission? Definitely without my permission. Good. Because my friend did the same thing. For a moment we simply looked at each other. Then we both started laughing. The entire situation was absurd. Yet beneath the humor, another realization quietly emerged. If Rachel had been asking questions about me weeks earlier, then Olivia's presence at the festival might not have been as accidental as I originally believed. And for the first time since we met, I began wondering whether Olivia herself knew more about this situation than she was admitting. The possibility lingered in my mind long after that conversation ended. Olivia seemed sincere whenever we talked, yet the timing of everything had become impossible to ignore. The festival. The shared assignments. The questions Rachel had asked. Melissa's suspicious enthusiasm. Every road somehow kept leading back to the same conclusion. Somebody had been pulling strings long before either Olivia or I arrived in town. The following morning, the festival entered its busiest day. Crowds filled every pathway from the moment the gates opened. Music drifted through the cool autumn air while the smell of cinnamon, fresh bread, and roasted coffee seemed to follow visitors everywhere. I expected Olivia to disappear into another round of mysterious evaluations, but instead she appeared at my booth shortly after 10 o'clock. I have a confession, she announced. That sounds serious. It depends on how much you enjoy being right. I folded my arms. Continue. Olivia smiled. You were correct about one thing. Only one? Do not get carried away. She handed me a folded document. At first glance it looked like an official schedule. Then I noticed a logo at the top that I had never seen before. What is this? I asked. The real reason I am here. I looked up. Olivia took a deep breath. I am not investigating the bake-off. You are not? No. Then what exactly have you been doing for the last 4 days? She laughed. Working on a television project. That answer surprised me enough to forget every theory I had developed. Olivia explained that she worked with a production company creating a documentary series about small American towns and the community events that kept them thriving. Her role involved visiting locations before filming crews arrived. She evaluated local personalities, traditions, volunteer programs, and the stories that made each town unique. Suddenly everything made sense. The notebook. The interviews. The observations. Even the confidential paperwork. So you were never searching for cheating bakers? I asked. No. Not even one suspicious pie. Not a single suspicious pie. I laughed so hard that several nearby visitors turned to look at us. For days I had imagined secret investigations, hidden scandals, and dramatic revelations. The reality was far less exciting and somehow far more charming. Olivia seemed relieved to finally tell the truth. Honestly, I wanted to explain sooner, she admitted. But the project requires confidentiality until evaluations are complete. That is actually reasonable. Thank you. I was worried you would think I was strange. Olivia, I thought you were an undercover baking detective. Good point. We spent the rest of the afternoon together moving between festival events. Without the mystery surrounding her job, conversation became even easier. Yet something else changed as well. For the first time, I noticed that neither of us seemed interested in spending time apart. We continued finding reasons to extend conversations, visit another booth, or walk a little farther through the festival grounds. Late that evening, as sunset painted the sky orange and gold, we stopped near the edge of the fairgrounds overlooking a quiet field. Olivia glanced toward me with an expression I could not immediately read. "There is one more thing I should probably tell you," she said. I felt my pulse quicken slightly. "What now?" She hesitated. Then she smiled. "The television assignment was real. But meeting you was not entirely an accident either." For several seconds, I simply stared at Olivia. The festival lights glowed around us while music drifted from the main stage in the distance. "Not entirely an accident?" I repeated. Olivia immediately looked nervous. That sounded worse than I intended. It definitely sounded suspicious. She laughed softly and shook her head. "Let me explain before you assume I secretly control the universe. That was actually my first theory." We began walking slowly along a quiet pathway lined with lanterns and autumn decorations. Olivia kept her hands in her coat pockets as she spoke. "About 3 months ago, Rachel started talking about one of her friends. Melissa." "Exactly. Apparently Melissa spent years trying to convince Rachel that she knew the perfect person for me. I could already see where this story was heading. And Rachel believed her?" "Not at first." Olivia smiled. "Then Melissa sent photographs." "Photographs?" "Nothing strange. Just pictures from community events, social gatherings, and charity fundraisers. I immediately made a mental note to have a very serious conversation with Melissa later." Olivia continued. "The more Rachel talked about you, the more curious I became." "So you researched me? That sounds much creepier than what actually happened." "Does it?" "Yes." Her laughter made it difficult to remain suspicious. "I learned that you owned an astrology business, volunteered throughout town, and somehow knew almost everyone in the county." "Those are all accurate." "Then Rachel discovered I had been assigned to evaluate this festival." I stopped walking. Olivia stopped too. We looked at each other for a moment before speaking simultaneously. "Rachel arranged it." "Melissa arranged it." We both laughed. Finally, the entire situation made sense. The strange assignments. The endless coincidences. The constant encounters. None of it had been random. Somehow our friends had coordinated everything. Yet despite the ridiculousness of the scheme, neither of us seemed angry. Mostly because the plan should not have worked. Real life did not operate like romantic comedies. Two strangers could be introduced and feel absolutely nothing. Yet that was not what happened here. We resumed walking through the festival. "Can I tell you something embarrassing?" Olivia asked. "After everything else tonight?" "Absolutely." She smiled at the ground before answering. "Before I arrived, Rachel described you as impossible to dislike." "That is a lot of pressure." "I know. I was prepared to be disappointed." "And?" Olivia looked directly at me. Unfortunately, Rachel was correct. My heart performed a surprisingly athletic maneuver inside my chest. For a moment, neither of us seemed certain how to continue the conversation. The atmosphere had shifted. The playful mystery remained, but something deeper now existed underneath it. Eventually we reached a small overlook behind the fairgrounds where visitors could watch the sunset across rolling hills. The sky glowed with shades of orange, pink, and gold. We stood quietly beside one another while the last sunlight faded. Then my phone buzzed. A text message from Melissa appeared on the screen. Before opening it, I somehow knew it would not improve my evening. I was correct. The message contained only a single photograph. In the picture, Melissa and Rachel sat together at a coffee shop table, both smiling proudly. Beneath the image was a short caption. "You are welcome." I showed the message to Olivia. She stared at it for 3 seconds before covering her face with both hands. I cannot believe they actually met. I zoomed in on the photograph. Something immediately caught my attention. On the table beside them sat an open folder filled with documents. One page displayed a title written in large bold letters. Project Matchmaker. And judging by the date printed underneath, they had started planning this nearly 6 months before either of us arrived at the festival. Neither of us slept much that night. After discovering that Melissa and Rachel had apparently been running what could only be described as an organized matchmaking operation, my entire understanding of the previous week felt slightly distorted. Every conversation, every coincidence, every accidental encounter suddenly looked different. Yet the strangest part was that I could not decide whether I was annoyed or amused. The next morning marked the final day of the festival. By noon, winners would be announced for the bake-off competition, and many visitors would begin heading home. I arrived at my booth expecting to focus on work. Instead, I found a large envelope waiting on my chair. My name was written across the front in unmistakable handwriting. Melissa. Oh no, I muttered. Inside were several printed pages. The first page carried a title that immediately made me laugh. Project Matchmaker, Progress Report. Beneath the title sat a detailed timeline documenting 6 months of planning. According to the report, Rachel and Melissa had met through an online community forum for event organizers nearly a year earlier. During a casual conversation, they discovered that both of them had spent years trying unsuccessfully to convince their closest friends to start dating again. One friend was an astrologer from Oregon. The other was a documentary evaluator from Seattle. The similarities apparently seemed obvious to everyone except the two people involved. The report became increasingly ridiculous from there. Melissa and Rachel had exchanged personality descriptions, favorite activities, career backgrounds, and even lists of hobbies. Thankfully, they had not shared private information. Still, the level of planning was impressive. There were notes about potential meeting locations, event schedules, community programs, volunteer opportunities. At one point, they had apparently considered introducing us at a charity auction before deciding that the autumn festival offered better odds. I was laughing so hard by the final page that I nearly missed the handwritten note attached at the end. It read, "If this worked, you are welcome. If it failed, please pretend none of this ever happened." A few minutes later, I found Olivia near the main pavilion holding an identical envelope. The moment our eyes met, we both started laughing. "Page 12, she asked. "The spreadsheet?" "The spreadsheet." We stood there surrounded by festival visitors while comparing the most absurd details of the plan. Neither of us could believe the amount of effort involved. Yet beneath the humor, another realization slowly emerged. The plan itself was ridiculous. The connection between us was not. Nobody could manufacture the conversations we had shared. Nobody could force two people to enjoy spending time together. Nobody could create genuine chemistry through scheduling spreadsheets. Eventually our laughter faded. Olivia folded her papers and looked toward the festival grounds. "You know," she said softly, "they only controlled the introduction." I nodded. Everything after that was our decision. The truth of that statement settled comfortably between us. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then a festival announcement echoed across the loudspeakers, calling participants and visitors toward the central stage for closing ceremonies. The event was ending. Tomorrow, Olivia would return to Seattle. I would remain in Oregon. Suddenly the limited amount of time left felt very real. We joined the crowd moving toward the stage. Music played. Awards were distributed. Contest winners celebrated. Yet my attention kept drifting toward the woman standing beside me. As the ceremony concluded, Olivia received a message on her phone. She read it, smiled, and handed me the screen. The message came from Rachel. It contained only one sentence. "The project is officially complete, but the important part starts now." Beneath the message was a photograph that neither of us had ever seen before. It showed Melissa and Rachel standing together 6 months earlier beside a whiteboard covered with plans. And written in large letters across the top was a prediction neither astrologer nor documentary evaluator had ever been supposed to see. The photograph remained on the screen while Olivia and I stared at it in disbelief. Across the top of the whiteboard, written in bright blue marker, were 5 simple words. They are going to click. Underneath that prediction sat dozens of notes, arrows, schedules, and diagrams that looked as though Melissa and Rachel had spent months planning a major business merger rather than introducing 2 people. The ridiculousness of it all should have bothered me. Instead, standing there beside Olivia as the festival reached its final moments, I found myself smiling. Maybe it was because the prediction had technically been correct. Or maybe it was because, despite all the planning in the world, neither Melissa nor Rachel could have controlled what actually happened after we met. The closing ceremony ended shortly afterward. Visitors slowly drifted toward parking lots, hotels, and bus stations. Vendors began packing equipment. Decorations came down. The familiar energy of the festival faded into the quiet rhythm of a town returning to normal. Olivia and I spent the rest of the afternoon helping volunteers clean up booths and carry supplies. It gave us an excuse to remain together a little longer. As evening approached, reality became impossible to ignore. Olivia's flight back to Seattle was scheduled for the following morning. For the first time since we met, neither of us seemed particularly eager to discuss the future. Eventually we found ourselves sitting on a wooden bench overlooking the nearly empty fairgrounds. The setting sun painted everything gold. "Can I admit something?" I asked. Olivia nodded. "I was supposed to leave 2 days ago." That surprised me. "What?" She smiled. "My evaluation assignment finished earlier than expected." "Then why did you stay?" Olivia looked at me as though the answer should have been obvious. "You know why." My heart immediately forgot how to behave normally. For several seconds I simply looked out across the field, trying unsuccessfully to appear calm. "Good," I finally said. "Because I was hoping that was the reason." Olivia laughed softly. The sound had become one of my favorite things during the past week. The next morning arrived much too quickly. I drove Olivia to the airport before sunrise. During the entire trip, neither of us mentioned goodbyes. Instead, we talked about future festivals, future visits, future coffee shops, future road trips, and future plans that somehow assumed continued contact without formally stating it. When we finally reached the terminal entrance, the conversation slowed. "Well," Olivia said. "Well," I replied. Neither of us moved. Then Olivia reached into her bag and handed me a small folded piece of paper. "What is this?" I asked. "Open it after I leave." Several hours later, back at home, I unfolded the note. Inside was a simple hand-drawn astrology chart. Olivia had clearly created it herself. In the center she had written a message. "Your predictions about me were completely wrong. But the one prediction you never made turned out to be right." Beneath the sentence sat a phone number, a smiley face, and one final line. "I already booked another trip to Oregon." I laughed so hard that my neighbors probably heard me through the walls. 6 months later, Olivia returned for the next autumn festival. This time there were no mysteries, no secret evaluations, and no matchmaking spreadsheets waiting behind the scenes. Just 2 people who had continued choosing each other long after the original setup ended. Sometimes visitors still ask whether I truly believe in fate. I usually tell them the same thing. I spent years studying stars, charts, and predictions. Yet the most important thing that ever happened to me began with a failed astrology reading, an undercover evaluator, and 2 friends who absolutely refused to mind their own business.